You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio Podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove. For all the latest Buckeyes news, analysis, reaction, and the best Ohio State community on the entire internet, head over to BuckeyeGrove.com or follow us on Twitter at Ohio State Rivals. Without any further delay, it's time to get unscripted, broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Mom! We get some meatloaf!
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Mom! The meatloaf!
Good Monday, everybody. Welcome back to the Unscripted Ohio Podcast, presented by BuckeyeGrove.com. I'm your host, Kyle Lamb. I'm getting pumped up. It just occurred to me as I started to get ready to record today that it's just a little under 2 months to go until the final season premiere of Game of Thrones. If you've listened to me enough, you know that I'm a big Thrones fan. Never read the books, love the series, but I'm really excited because I am perfectly on pace. I've been working the last month or so to try to rewatch Game of Thrones and finish with the season 6, which was the last season that's been made so far. Season 7 is the final season coming up on April 14th. And I've been trying to rewatch the 67 episodes to where I time it where the last episode I watch coincides with Sunday afternoon of the final season premiere. And it just occurred to me that I am perfectly on pace. I have I think 50 episodes to go, and there's 58 days. So if I do continue on my pace for 5 a week, I will get done perfectly on time. So I'm giving myself a big pat on the back. Really that's the only thing I got going for me TV wise. Shameless is winding down, and honestly, I've been watching that out of nostalgia for the last several years because it just hasn't been the same since early on in the show. I'm anxiously awaiting the return of Billions, which I love. The final season of Homeland is coming up. I love Homeland. Of course, there's the Breaking Bad movie coming out, Better Call Saul. A 5th season of that will be out later this year. A lot of things that I love, a lot of shows that I love to watch. But anyway, it's just right now Game of Thrones is it for me. That's the focus until April 14th. So, hey, look, today on the show, Ross Fulton will be coming up here in a few minutes. We're going to be talking some football. We haven't spoke with Ross for a while, so I'm really anxious that we were able to talk and have a conversation, kind of a prospectus about this year. We'll get into some offensive stuff, some defensive stuff, and then I'll ask him about the FPI flub by ESPN this past week, because he's a big analytics guy like myself. So I was kind of curious to get his opinion on that. So Ross will be coming up. And basketball, what can you say? I'll get into the basketball talk later, but the Spartans really finished off the Buckeyes in a probably a frustrating way if you're a Buckeye fan. Ohio State, once again, it kind of felt like the first meeting, really. Ohio State, remember back in Columbus in the first meeting, Ohio State for really 30 to 35 minutes played Michigan State really well, really tough. They took it to them, just not able to close the game. At the end of the day, they fell apart, and this was a little bit of a rerun. Ohio State outplayed Michigan State for probably about 32 minutes, and then it just got away from them. Turnovers, trying to do too much offensively, getting away from the offense, and then, hey, give Michigan State some credit too. Offensively, they stepped up and made some big shots. That's what they do. They're one of the best shooting teams in the Big Ten, and Ohio State was not able to keep them off the scoreboard for long enough, but it really got away with turnovers and missing some bunnies. There's so many missed shots down inside. Hey, look, I know you're frustrated with this Ohio State basketball team. It's not as bad as it looks. I'm not saying it's good. Let me clear this up too, by the way. This is something that's really been gnawing at me. If you are on Twitter and you may have been mentioning, or you may have been seeing me mention Ohio State versus Michigan as far as this offensive argument, let me clear something up, because I think some people have missed the context. If you've seen me talk about this, I have not said anywhere where I think this Ohio State basketball team has a good offense, okay? That is not an argument I've been making. and I'm really kind of tired. It's like, I don't want to call anybody out, but I'm tired of a couple of people coming at me, trying to throw it back in my face every time Ohio State, has a bad offensive showing. See this, how can you call this Ohio State offense good? How can you call it better than Michigan? I haven't, okay? Here's the context of this conversation. Several weeks ago when Ohio State played Michigan, there were people that were frustrated with Ohio State and saying, Michigan is so much better at offense, and this is what Ohio State lacks this, and Ohio State lacks that, and they were using Michigan as an example. All I have done is shown that Michigan's offense is a bad example. Michigan is not a good offense, okay? They have scored only, I think, 10 more points in Big Ten play than Ohio State, something along those lines. It's not very much. Michigan's offense is struggling too, and they're winning games with defense. And so all I did was point out that Ohio State's offense has been just as efficient as Michigan. And I'm not even saying that Michigan's offense is good. I'm not saying Ohio State's offense is good. I'm saying Michigan was a bad example. If your frustration in Ohio State's basketball teams, especially on the offensive end, if that's gnawing at you, if that's upsetting to watch, Michigan is not the team right now that I would be pointing at offensive production that you want Ohio State to be like. Okay, that's not a good example, and that's all I've been trying to argue is that Michigan's offense is not very good. It's not any more diverse than Ohio State. They haven't been shooting the ball better than Ohio State. Michigan offense is really efficient in terms of they take care of the ball. They're a lot better with the ball than Ohio State is, and because they don't turn the ball over. They get more scoring possession opportunities, but they actually have not been scoring very much. Not any more frequently than Ohio State. So that's all I've been saying. So there are people that keep coming at me with Michigan this and Michigan that, and Ohio State's not a good offense. What are you talking about? All I'm saying is Ohio State's offense, for as bad as it's been, is actually not any worse than Michigan's offense statistically. I mean, that's a fact. And just look at points, look at points per possession. Any major way you measure scoring, they have not been better. And that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying Ohio State's offense is not very good. I'll talk about the Michigan State game. And look, I think you're going to see a lot better Ohio State offense next year because Ohio State has the role players. They just need to fill them in with a couple of scorers, and that's coming next year. So I'll get into that in a few minutes as well. Later on in the show, we'll talk about the Buckeye basketball program. It's not as bad as it looks. It's not good. I'm not saying it's a great offense. I'm just saying they still got enough to get into the tournament, okay? And we'll get into that in a little bit. Hey, so one last thing before I get Ross in here. I do want to talk about the podcast itself because I'm really kind of excited with the direction things are going. Thank you so much for everybody that listens to us. Obviously we upload these podcasts on Monday and Friday on BuckeyeGrove.com. I record them usually Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, and Thursday afternoon, Thursday evening. And, like last week, sometimes, the interviews I have to do a little bit earlier in the week. I record the interviews if I need to get them up and we can't schedule them closer to the time we upload. But in the future, I would like to tell people that I do have plans to go eventually to 5 days a week, and I'm really excited about that. Hit me up on Twitter at KYLam8 if there are features and different things you'd like to see. I'm not going to disclose everything that I've got planned, but I will say I do have, when I have 5 days a week to record podcasts, I'll be able to incorporate more interviews with national and regional beat writers and media types. I'll be able to incorporate more alums, former players, former coaches, hopefully, maybe some more recruiting-oriented segments. There are things that I have planned for when I get to that point that I believe will continue to enhance the show, and I'm really excited about that. We'll continue to do the format the same way. I think if we go to 5 days a week, maybe it'll go from like 45 minutes an episode, maybe down to like 30 or 35. But we'll still continue to upload the shows on SoundCloud and iTunes and Google Play, Spotify and Stitcher. They'll still continue to show up every time on BuckeyeGrove.com. I will tell you, that we are trending towards some sponsorship. We have JFQ Lending coming on as a full-time title sponsor as of March 1st. I'm very excited about that. John, the owner, has been really awesome to work with. So starting March 1st, you will see JFQ Lending as a title sponsor, and I've got some other sponsors coming aboard in April. We will have some advertisements and sponsors. I hope you will support them because really with them, it will allow the show to grow and expand and do a lot more exciting things. And so I just wanted to give a heads up that some sponsorship is coming, but it's going to be great for the show, and it will allow me to record 5 days a week, and I think the ceiling is unlimited. So I'm really, really excited about that. So that is just a little bit of show news that I really wanted to share. I know people sometimes are a little, they're apprehensive about listening to advertisements and their favorite shows and podcasts and stuff. And I don't want to overdo it, but I just do want to let people know it's coming, and I'm excited about it because it will allow me to have the resources to grow and expand and hopefully make the podcast as good as I can.
Ross Fulton is here with his whiteboard to break down what the Buckeyes and their opponents are doing on the field. Can't see the whiteboard? Close your eyes and imagine really hard. It's time to go inside the X's and O's with Ross.
Pain heals. Chicks dig scars. Glory lasts forever.
All right, we're back now. We are going to get rolling with some football talk. Ross, always a pleasure. It's been a while since we've heard from you. How you been in these last several weeks? We've had a lot of things kind of come to fruition after a lot of speculation. And what's been new with you here lately, my man?
The same old. Just trudging my way through the off season.
There's a lot to trudge the way through. So. Let's start with, we'll kind of go down, item by item here. Let's start with Justin Fields. Since the last time we spoke, he has, become eligible. We knew he was, I think the last time we talked, I think he had already enrolled at Ohio State, but now we know he'll be eligible at the starting quarterback position this year. Ohio State's biggest issue, I think, now with him in the fold is more an issue of depth rather than, I think they're going to have a high-level competition there with Fields and Matthew Baldwin. I don't think the concern there is necessarily even if Baldwin has to come in an injury situation, it's what would happen after that. But certainly Fields appears to be poised and ready to be the starter in 2019.
Yeah, I would be pretty surprised, if not shocked, if he was not the starter. I don't think they're going to hand it to him, but I think given his experience and talent level, I would feel pretty comfortable penciling him in.
So now that we kind of have a little bit more of a feel for, the coaching staff and also the quarterbacking situation. So, give me your view, your expectation of what this offense may look like this year.
I think that Ryan Day had a pretty telling quote during his last press conference, which, to sort of summarize it, he said essentially that they were going to be a pro-style passing team combined with the college run offense and RPOs. And I think that pretty well sums it up. I think the passing game will look a lot like what it was last year with a, pro-style 5-read progression passing system, that mixes shallow crossing routes, vertical routes, and the like. There's still going to be a spread run offense in the shotgun. I think he talked some as well during that presser about what Mike Yurcik brings from Oklahoma State. And, a couple of times Ryan Day talked about inserting the tight end, as a lead blocker. And essentially what that means is basically lining someone up like a fullback for lead plays. It gives a little bit more variety. And again, it's more of a pro-style downhill run game. You've seen that a lot from Oklahoma State. I would have considered them essentially a pro-style scheme from the shotgun and a college offense combined with tempo and RPOs, and that's pretty much what Day's describing. So I think you'll see sort of an evolution towards that, maybe a little bit more pistol, a little bit more lead blocks with RPOs.
We've seen some zone blocking incorporated into the run game. Where do you see that evolving in the next couple of years? Yeah,
Ohio State under Meyer has always been primarily a zone blocking team. And, there's most teams use zone running to some extent. I mean, I think they'll continue to do that. I think that the quarterback read aspect of those zone plays will be a little bit minimized. I don't think it will go away. I think that, Alabama is a good example of another team that is essentially a pro-style offense from the shotgun, and they use the quarterback, especially with Tua, to essentially cancel out a blocker, an unblocked defender, even though he's rarely going to keep. So I think you'll see a little bit more of that. As I said, a little bit more of like having a lead blocker instead of having pure read plays. But I think with Justin Fields, to go back, I mean, just given where he is as a development and just how effective he is as a runner, I certainly think you're going to see him running the football, particularly in short yardage and goal line. I just think it'll be probably more like 8 to 10 runs a game, as less like 15 or more.
Yeah, I that's another thing, and I think there has been some assumption that because we saw it abandoned last year that Ryan Day just didn't want to do it, but I feel like also that was just, because they just simply didn't have a runner at quarterback to do it. I don't think it's going to disappear, and I think you'll see it come back in select situations a little bit more next year, and like you said, it's probably not 20 times a game, but, there's a good chance I think you're going to see 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 times in a given game with Fields.
Yeah, to return again to that Clemson-Alabama national championship, I think that kind of shows where college offenses increasingly are. I mean, I think you're most dangerous when you have someone who can make all the throws and is a potential pro quarterback prospect, and less where maybe Urban Meyer was a decade ago with the quarterback as, as much of, if not more of a run threat. But that said, I think that all those offenses still want to have that quarterback threat. They're all in the shotgun. Again, they're all using it to cancel out blockers. They're all running the quarterback strategically. They just pick and choose their spots a little bit more.
I want to ask you about the pass game in particular. Since we spoke, Austin Mack, we suspected would be back because of the injury. I think that kind of hurt his chances to leave early. Ben Victor, there were some people wondering if he might transfer out or if he might, surprisingly declare for the draft, but he did neither, and he's back in for another go at Ohio State. And unexpectedly, KJ Hill returned. So Ohio State now suddenly has a pretty full complement of receivers when you throw in Chris Olave and some of the young guys, the freshmen and sophomores, coming in up behind them. How do you see this pass game progressing as far as, do you see a whole lot of difference in maybe the routes that they focus on, the mesh routes, some of the underneath stuff, or do you think they go a little bit longer and take more shots downfield this year?
Honestly, I think it'll look a lot like last year. I think they'll take their shots and they're there. But I think that's where modern passing games are. That's where you see all the air raid teams make their noise. That's where you've seen the New England Patriots do for years. So the most efficient way is you hit those underneath throws and force the defense to come up, and then you take your shots. Especially with KJ Hill coming back. I mean, he's probably their most effective receiver in the middle of the field on those shallow crossing routes. So, I'm sure he will be featured early and often. But yeah, I think it'll continue to be a mix of there's option and shallow cross routes in the middle of the field combined with what I call vertical stems on the outside, where you give the outside receiver the option of going deep or coming back on a comeback route, depending on how the cornerback is playing them.
The biggest question mark for me, Ross, going into the spring really is the offensive line. And that, I think, goes for both sides of the ball. Like, I don't know. I feel like we're going to see a resurgence from the linebackers and defensive backs, which we'll get into here in a second, on the defensive side of the ball. But I think the offensive line, for me, is the key to Ohio State's season because, they pass protected so well last year. But overall, I would say the run game was a little bit disappointing. They did come on a little bit at the end of the year, which I think was encouraging. I kind of feel like if they can take that next step and run the ball a little more efficiently, I think the pass game will still be there. So to me, like, I'm really curious to see, how they do, replacing those guys off the line and see where that progresses throughout the year.
Agreed. I think the offensive line is the biggest question mark and may remain so for the next few years. But I, as we talked about during the season, I always maintained that the issues running the football were more of a numbers and scheme issue with the lack of a running quarterback and adequately adjusting to that fact on offense, less the offensive line execution. But that said, they're replacing a lot of guys. Obviously, getting Jackson from Rutgers to come in would make a big difference, and that'll something I'm sure we'll probably find out here in the next few weeks. But yeah, I mean, I think they're not totally green. I mean, they have guys, even if they weren't official starters, whether it was an Alabi starting against Washington or, Wyatt Davis playing the last couple of games. They have guys who have gotten live action during games that mattered. But, how they fit everyone together and obviously the center position remains a question mark.
Ross, on Buckeye Grove a couple weeks back, you wrote a pretty good analysis of Greg Madison's scheme and what he's done in the past at Michigan. Can you kind of recap what people should expect from him philosophically? I know, Ryan Day will have maybe a little bit of say, but ultimately it appears it's going to be Madison's defense for the most part. So kind of give your expectation, recap what he's done in the past and how it might impact Ohio State's defense going forward.
Sure. I think that to take a step back, Madison has generally been, his focus in his career, whether as a position coach or as a coordinator, has generally been the front seven and run defense. So I think Hafley will have a large say in the coverage schemes and how they meld everything together. But Madison has always been a very good technician with the front seven. He has traditionally been a 4-3 under coach, which is also what Ohio State has primarily used the last few years with Greg Schiano. But, what makes it interesting is given that he hasn't been a coordinator since 2014, obviously the spread offense was prevalent then, even more prevalent now. And, playing a 4-3 under is generally a defense that you play against more pro-style personnel. So, when he's gone nickel, it's been he tends to bring in a nickel and then run an over defense. So I think the questions for me will remain, how often they use nickel, what type of nickel are they using? Are they going to bring in a third corner? Are they going to have more of a kind of like a hybrid safety guy? How much do they actually use a linebacker? Madison did mention during his press conference that, they'll have, and I think Hafley said something similar, 2 inside linebackers and then an outside linebacker, which is how I would also describe a 4-3 under defense. You have your Mike and Wills, which are your, inside guys, and then the Sam is sort of a unique outside position. But I think you'll see a lot of nickel as well.
And a lot of people obviously wondering from last year, the linebackers and where they were positioned. It was very well known with watching Greg Schiano's defense that they were walking linebackers up the line, and it seemed to put their guys in bad position. That is probably, I'm guessing, going to be a thing of the past.
Well, it depends on the situation, right? So, Madison has long, especially on third down and passing situations, also like to use, what people sometimes call an Okie front, sometimes called Psycho front, where you have a bunch of guys hovering to confuse the offensive line where the blitz is coming from. But that said, he will not probably do it in run situations or, first or second standard downs. He's, as I said, I think he's generally been known for having sound execution, especially up front. So I think you'll see some of that stuff get cleaned up, some of the mistakes from last year. And I think as importantly, as Hafley talked about during his press conference, they're not going to sit in man coverage or any specific coverage all game long, which I think really put the defense sort of in the linebackers in particular, because they were stuck a lot in run-pass conflict, but, put them in a bind where the offense basically knows what they're going to get, and so they can scheme around it.
Something I discussed with Corey Thompson on last week's podcast, we discussed how, Jeff Hafley did not seem real excited about the idea of necessarily rotating corners as liberally as Ohio State has done in the past. He didn't close the door on it. He said he understood, after he realized the kind of talent that they had coming through, he understood the reasons and advantages to doing it, but he still didn't come across as a guy that wants to do it. If he has, I don't even know, maybe he's not going to have enough say, but do you see that changing with Ohio State this year, or do you think they still ideally like to get in 3-4 cornerbacks rotated throughout the game?
I likewise picked up on that. I was I personally was, I'm in agreement with him. I thought that it was like kind of too much of a straitjacket. I mean, it made sense when they had, Lattimore, Conley, and Ward, because then you're talking about 3 first-round draft picks. But I think the last couple of years it's been sort of unnecessary. I also think that, again, I don't think they're going to play as much man coverage all over the field as they have, and so you're not going to have corners that are just chasing wide receivers play after play. Because if you're playing man and the receiver just runs you off, even if it's a run play, you're still sprinting down the field. Whereas, matchup zone can be a little different. So I never say never. They may decide to do it. I do think Hafley will have a lot of say in that. But I think that it will be a situation. Also, again, it goes back to the nickel where, are you going to have your third corner being the nickel back? And like this year with Sean Wade, where he was playing like 40 or 50 snaps a game also.
Ross, before I let you go, one subject I wanted to give you a chance to chime in on. I was curious, since you and I kind of share a common philosophy in the use of analytics in football and the balance between, just watching what you're seeing out there and also trying to analyze it. And, this week there was a lot of controversy is probably not the right word, but intrigue with the release of the FPI, preseason 2019 rankings and Ohio State not being listed in the top 10. And I have an idea of their methodology and how they try to project teams for the next year, but it was really strange, even knowing how they do it, how Ohio State does not find itself in the top 10 in those rankings, given, their explanation was, well, Justin Fields didn't have a lot of playing time his freshman year, and there wasn't a lot of data to use, but I know they usually rely on recruiting rankings in lieu of a lack of data. And, being one of the top quarterbacks of all time in the ESPN recruiting rankings, it still perplexes me how, one of the top quarterbacks coming as a sophomore can't find a way into the top 10. I'm curious your take on that, and if you're buying the explanation, knowing you pay attention to analytics at least somewhat.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is I tend not to be a huge FPI person, just because they don't provide a lot of the data on what they're doing.
Yeah,
relying. It's sort of a black box. I mean, it's kind of strange. I mean, I think you see this though too, a little bit of Bill Connelly's S&P, and this is where data can sometimes has to be complemented, right? So Ohio State, if you technically are replacing a lot of offensive starters, but as what I was saying earlier with the offensive line, and this applies at a lot of positions, they have a lot of guys who have played a lot of plays and been pretty significant contributors, and they have everyone basically coming back on defense, or a large chunk of people at least. So I think it was. I don't think you're going to see another poll or ranking system out there that doesn't have Ohio State in the top 10. I mean, at the end of the day, it's I guess fun to talk about, but it doesn't have a huge impact on anything else. But yeah. To answer the specific question, I did not agree with that.
Yeah, you're right. And look, I want people to understand at the end of the day, like Ross said, it doesn't make a big difference. And I'm maybe tackling this because it's ESPN and it's a fun subject. I know people like picking fun at ESPN, but I do find it interesting because, like you said, you're not going to find any other projection system that does not have Ohio State in the top 10. And that doesn't mean you have to subscribe to groupthink and therefore it's wrong just because all the others do it. But, I mean, Vegas and all the casinos and sports books have similar algorithms projecting these things, and you're going to see Ohio State in the top 5 in almost every projection system, even with the lack of data from Fields' freshman season. So that's why it just seemed odd to me. And, I understand there are certain things that Ohio State will have uncertainty coming in, but it just still, big picture, I just was really surprised by it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I didn't quite understand it. And obviously, I mean, how those things play out too. I think, there was, 4 or 5, maybe 3 or 4 SEC teams in the top 5 or 6. And obviously some of them are going to play each other. I mean, that's not how things are ever going to pan out. So, that's the old rules in the playoff system still apply at the end of the day. win all your games, you're fine. If you lose one, it has to be the right one. So,
well, when half of the top 10 is the SEC, and then you have Notre Dame and Michigan in there in the top 10 as well, needless to say, Ohio State fans are going to have a field day with that kind of rhetoric.
Exactly, and some of those teams I would certainly quibble with, but again, it's a lot of it, as you said, is based off returning production and how they measure that.
Yeah, just an FYI for the people out there, Michigan is returning 15 starters, Ohio State 14 starters. So things that make you go,
Yeah, I mean, it's basically based for Michigan. I think it's largely based on Patterson returning.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's just it. It's the quarterback.
Yeah. Because Michigan loses almost their entire defense, or at least most of their primary contributors.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to. Which it just shows their algorithm is very, very heavily dependent on the quarterback and prior production. Which I'm not saying that that's necessarily wrong, but it is very clear from looking at the rankings that that's what they value.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, well, that is going to do it for Ross today. Hey, man, I appreciate you coming on, and we'll definitely have you coming back on here when we get closer to spring practice.
Sounds great, Kyle. Thanks as always.
Ross Fulton, you can catch him on BuckeyeGrove.com, and you can catch him on Twitter at Ross R. Fulton.
Stretch runtime here at Unscripted Ohio. Kick up your feet as we cross the finish line with the Buckeye Beat, the latest in Ohio State news and notes.
Kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
So Ohio State basketball drops a 62-44 decision in East Lansing at the Breslin Center. Again, for the second time this season, Ohio State looked really, I don't want to say really good, but they looked presentable against Michigan State and just was not able to close the deal. They were engaged defensively. I thought half-court defense was great until about the 7 or 8 minute mark left in the second half. And then they just sort of, that one play where Ohio State was up, I think it was 36-32. They were up 4 points. And then, Michigan State threw an errant pass that went out of bounds and should have been Ohio State ball. Ohio State did not touch it. And that play, the ref signaled it was Michigan State ball. Michigan State retained possession. And then shortly thereafter, Matt McQuaid hits this little curl screen. He comes around a curl screen and then hits a little two-pointer, makes it a 2-point game. Ohio State turns the ball over. Michigan State comes down, takes the lead. From that point on, really, it was, Ohio State finished, or Michigan State finished the game on a 30-8 run, and the game just got out of hand at that point. You could feel the momentum slipping away. That one play, and I'm not blaming the refs for Ohio State's loss, because that's not why Ohio State lost. But that one play was a momentum killer, because you could feel the energy in the building. Even watching it on TV, I was not there, but I could feel the energy in the building just really shift after that made basket. And Michigan State, you could tell, because I think 4 out of the next 6 possessions they scored. They got hot. They started hitting 3-pointers. And Ohio State, you could see it bothering Ohio State, because they started really pushing some bad shots. Luther Muhammad, I thought, got out of control. He tried to force 3 or 4 possessions where, there was just not anything there, and he tried to get in the lane, and he wound up either losing. He picked up a charge on one. He lost control of the ball on a second, and then he forced up a shot, and then he got called for a foul on the ensuing offensive rebound on another. And those possessions just killed Ohio State. Keyshawn Woods tried to force one later on in the run when they were down 8. It just really got away from Ohio State. So that one call that went in the favor of Michigan State, it's not the reason Ohio State lost, but it was the reason that momentum changed in that point of the game, and Ohio State really let things get away from there. Now, here's the good news, okay? So Ohio State, again, for about 30 minutes, I thought played really well. They were engaged defensively until down the stretch. They were actually running really good offense until late in the game. And they weren't making shots, and I think that's the biggest thing that killed them, if anything, is because they left probably 10, 12, maybe even 14 points on the table by missing bunnies and shots at the rim that they really should have capitalized on. And I think had they made some of those shots that they had great opportunities at the rim, the game maybe goes very, very differently. And that's the problem is this team does not finish very well at the rim. They don't attack defenders. They don't go into the body at defenders. Instead, they go very loosely. Some of that is length. Ever since that Syracuse game early in the year, I just got the feeling this team is so scarred emotionally by the lack of length against taller teams. And that really has impacted them. And they just don't finish well. And that's part of the problem. And they've got to attack. They attacked well as far as getting to the rim, but they don't finish well. And that's been an ongoing problem all year long. So they've got to finish those points because they actually took care of the ball. In the first half, they took care of the ball really well. Second half, they got a little sloppy, especially as the game got tighter and went further along. Some of those silly mistakes started manifesting themselves once again. But here's the thing. The good news, okay? There is good news in all this, both short-term and long-term. Now, let me get the bad news out of the way. Yeah, this team is what it is. I said earlier, when I was explaining myself at the top of the show, look, I'm not trying to fool anybody here. This is not the Golden State Warriors. Okay, this team is not an offensive juggernaut. Okay, they don't take care of the ball well. I just said that they don't finish at the rim very well. They're really bad at finishing at the rim. This is one of the worst Ohio State teams I've seen finishing at the rim. They do have shooters. I know some people say this is a terrible shooting team. I wouldn't go that far. They have shooters. They don't have consistent shooters right now. Dwayne Washington's very streaky. Luther Muhammad, coming into the game, was second or third in the Big Ten in shooting from three-point range. So he has been making shots. Justin Aarons, when he's in there, can make shots at times. Musa Jallow can make shots. They have a lot of guys that can make shots. They don't have a lot of guys that make shots with regularity, and I think that's the problem. But the biggest issue is not having the point guard, not finishing, the silly turnovers, which at least this game, were better. Michigan State doesn't force a lot of turnovers, and Ohio State didn't turn it over a lot. But they have limitations is what I'm trying to say, okay? And most of these limitations are offensively. And so, again, as I was saying earlier, I'm not calling this team a good offensive team. They're not. They have limitations. They have their problems. They have their warts. Anything I've said on Twitter in terms of this Ohio State offense relative to Michigan has not been in the context of saying Ohio State is a good team offensively. It's actually Michigan State has limitations too. In the last eight or nine games in Big Ten play, Ohio State's been scoring just as much as Michigan. So it's not really trying to prop up Ohio State or gloss over some glaring weaknesses that Ohio State has on offense. So I'm getting a little long-winded here, but I'm trying to say that Ohio State, the good news is, despite how frustrating their offense has been at times in a large portion of the Big Ten schedule, they are still in prime position to make the NCAA tournament. And I know it's, throw away any preconception or notion you may have of what constitutes an NCAA tournament team or teams that would normally make the NIT. Because this year, in this given season, I promise you, we just had Rocco Miller on last week talking bracketology, and he said it, Ohio State is in the NCAA tournament right now. We talked about the discrepancy of the bubble. There's a big disparity. Oklahoma, people are projecting in right now, and Oklahoma has been far worse off than Ohio State. Indiana still has some people projecting them in, and they've lost like 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 11 games. It's a very, very weak bubble. And Ohio State, one thing that other teams do not have on the bubble is it still has quality road wins. Whatever you think of Nebraska and Creighton and Indiana, who all three are probably not NCAA tournament teams right now, they're still solid top 50 type of teams in net, which is, the NCAA evaluation tool. It's the new ranking that has replaced the ERPI. They're top 50 type of teams, and if you beat a top 75 team on the road, it's considered a quality win, a quadrant 1 win. They split the wins up into 4 categories. Your quadrant 1 wins are the wins that stand out to the NCAA selection committee. Ohio State has 4 of those right now. Okay, they have the win at Cincinnati, which is against an NCAA tournament team, and then the other 3, which are quadrant 1 wins, albeit against teams that are not in the tournament. So Ohio State has gone out on the road and won against decent, basketball teams. that is going to get them into the NCAA tournament. Regardless of what you think of this team, whether you think, well, this is an NIT team or this terrible team, throw out all of your pessimism and your frustrations about this basketball team, as long as they avoid the total collapse here down the stretch, they're in the NCAA tournament. And for me, avoiding that would be winning those 3 home games, Northwestern, Iowa, Wisconsin. If they pick up one of those road games as well, Northwestern, Purdue, Maryland, that's gravy. That's just an added bonus. But if they avoid the collapse and win the games they're supposed to win at home, and maybe they're not supposed to beat Wisconsin or Iowa at home, but if they do, it's a quality win. But win those games, and Ohio State will be in the NCAA tournament. Will they do anything with it and make a run in the NCAA tournament? Probably not. Okay, you don't know what's going to happen in March, and you can't predict. Well, this is a one and done team, or this is a first weekend team, or a second weekend team. You just never know. And every team that's good enough to make an at-large is good enough to make a run in the NCAA tournament. You just have to get hot the right time. I'm not predicting that this team does anything if it does get in the NCAA tournament, but you just never know. That's part of the enjoyment. That should be the enjoyment. In a season like this, just let your expectations go, okay? Don't worry about what this team should do or will do. Just watch the basketball games and try to remember where this program was at 2 years ago. Because even though I know you're frustrated with how this season is going, some of you may be frustrated with Chris Holtmann, which you shouldn't be, by the way. You just got to remember where this program was at and where it is now. It's so much more enjoyable to watch this team because it's not a lack of effort. It's not a lack of want to. These guys want to win. They're out there giving it their all. So there's no reason to be upset with that aspect. And where this program has come, you didn't expect a lot from this team coming into the year with Keita Bates-Diop gone, with Jayshawn Tate gone, with Andrew Dockich gone, Cam Williams. There wasn't a lot to expect from this team this year. I know some people said, well, maybe 8th or 10th or 12th, where some people were picking this team in the preseason. Maybe that wasn't fair, and it was a little frustrating to see, but they're still potentially trending to finish ahead of that. Not by a lot, but they are. They're ahead where people thought they would be at the start of the season. That's the good news. And I think it's just time for Ohio State fans to sit back and, despite this team's awards, just enjoy the season for what it is. Because I tell you what, and here's the other good news, the second part of this, the longer view. Help is on its way. And I'm not certain yet that DJ Carton is the savior. I'm not certain that EJ Liddell is the savior. I'm not certain that Alonzo Gaffney is the savior. CJ Walker, by the way, I've been told by people that would know, CJ Walker is going to please Ohio State fans. All the attention is on DJ Carton, but CJ, and remember, there's going to be the CJ, DJ, EJ triumvirate next year on Ohio State. I'm really excited about that. CJ, DJ, EJ. All will be on the Ohio State roster. But C.J. Walker, I've been told, is going to please Ohio State fans. He's going to be a stabilizing force for Ohio State at point guard. He's not the scorer and the big flashy player that DJ Carton will be, but he is going to stamp his mark on Ohio State. He's the point guard that people have been waiting to see this year, okay? He handles the ball very well. He plays smart basketball, plays good defense. I think people are going to like C.J. Walker, and he's going to get a lot more playing time than I think most people think. And DJ Carton will also get a lot of playing time. But you've got the scorers coming in next year. You've got the ball handler and the point guard coming in. So what that's going to do is having these players and Luther Muhammad and Dwayne Washington and Musa Jallow and Kyle Young and all these guys being a year better. Next year, Ohio State will have the go-to scorers. They'll have the point guard. They'll have the ball handlers. And then suddenly you're going to realize how good this team is because they all get to settle into complementary roles. They get to be role players, and you're going to see a big difference when you add in a couple of go-to scorers and then you add in the experienced role players around them. Okay, it's a huge difference. And Ohio State right now is just missing a few key pieces, and those key pieces are on their way. So forget whatever you think about this team right now. Help is on its way, and these guys are all going to be smarter, wiser, more experienced next year in Ohio State basketball. I think it's going to be very, very good next year. You're going to have Big Ten will be interesting because you got Illinois. We just saw Illinois. That's a team that's coming on strong and it's going to be really good next year. Michigan is going to be very good on paper. Maryland will be good on paper. I'm really interested to see the Big Ten next year, but I think Ohio State will be a key factor in that Big Ten race next season. So all I'm saying, Ohio State basketball, this offense, we've seen what it is now. We're on, it's February 18th as this podcast is out on Monday, and we know what this team is, okay? There's no illusions here. Despite what you think I've said on Twitter comparing them to Michigan, it's not about this team being good offensively. That's not the argument I'm making. It is what it is. They have their limitations. There's no mystery involved. But, this team is good enough defensively and doing some of the other little things. They're good enough to sneak into the NCAA tournament, and after that, it's a crapshoot. So all I'm saying with Ohio State basketball, let's see what they do down the stretch here. Can they do just enough to get in the NCAA tournament? And if so, let your mind go. Use your imagination. Just enjoy whatever added bonus they provide you. If they get to the tournament, that's more than some people expected before the year. That's more than you could hope for. Anyhow, that's going to wrap it up for the Unscripted Ohio podcast today. A reminder that Corey and Johnny will be back with the Scarlet and Great podcast on Wednesday, and we'll be back on our normal time on Friday. So catch the show every Monday and Friday on BuckeyeGrove.com. You can catch us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and Spotify. And, of course, you can hit me up on Twitter at KYLam8. Would love to hear any thoughts you have about the basketball season. Will the Buckeyes get it done and make the NCAA tournament? I say yes. I don't think it's as big of an uphill climb as people think just because of the nature of the bubble and because of those road wins. We'll be back at you on Friday. Enjoy your week, everybody.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.